No renegotiation in Brussels, but Theresa May says the EU will provide further clarification on her Brexit deal.
If we are going to leave with the deal, this is it. But my discussions with colleagues today have shown that further clarification and discussion following the Council's conclusions is, in fact, possible.
But there are heated words between Mrs May and Jean-Claude Juncker as she accuses him of describing her latest efforts as nebulous. He denies it.
I did not refer to her, but to the overall state of the debate in Britain. And that's why I was saying that this was nebulous, foggy in English.
We'll be looking at where the negotiations are at now with the EU and where they go from here. Also tonight, a baby has died after being attacked by 2 dogs in the family home when he was just 5 weeks old. The Premier League joins Chelsea in condemning unacceptable behaviour after anti-Semitic chants at last night's game. Donald Trump's former lawyer says the president is a liar and knew about hush money paid to women on his behalf. And back on dry land at last, the British sailor rescued after being adrift 2,000 miles offshore.
And coming up on BBC News After, Raheem Sterling's comments on how young black footballers are betrayed by the press, we'll be discussing race, football and the media.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. After a bruising encounter in Brussels, the Prime Minister says she still believes she can get extra assurances from EU leaders to get her Brexit withdrawal agreement through Parliament. EU leaders say they'll offer no renegotiation, but will offer what they call further clarifications on the Irish backstop, which aims to avoid barriers to trade on the island of Ireland. Theresa May was filmed having a heated discussion with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, during which she accused him of saying her latest proposals are nebulous, something he has denied. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has the latest.
A bad omen, a bitter morning, for more than one reason. The Prime Minister came to Brussels hunting concessions from the EU.
Does the EU like your plan, Prime Minister?
But they didn't just say no. One of their top politicians said she didn't even know what she wanted. She was nebulous, leading this private, careful politician to show real anger. "Did you call me nebulous?" she seems to say to Jean-Claude Juncker. He grasping her arm. The microphones may be off, but you can see exactly what went on. The Dutch Prime Minister comes along to try to make peace. Later, she had not forgotten the accusation.
I was crystal clear about the assurances which are needed on the backstop, having heard the views of MPs in the House of Commons. I reiterated that it is in the interests of the EU, as well as the UK, to get this over the line.
EU leaders had said she would not get those concessions on the so-called backstop. She begged to differ.
My discussions with colleagues today have shown that further clarification and discussion following the Council's conclusions is, in fact, possible.
You looked very angry when you were speaking to Jean-Claude Juncker earlier today. What did you say to him, and did he admit that he had called you nebulous? And secondly, the summit conclusions suggest the EU is not willing to budge, but you appear to be suggesting that they might. Can you tell us more about what they've said to you about their willingness to move? Because if Parliament won't budge and the EU won't budge, is it time for you to budge?
Well, first of all, I had a robust discussion with Jean-Claude Juncker. I think that's the sort of discussion you're able to have when you've developed a working relationship and you work well together. What came out of that was his clarity that actually he'd been talking, when he used that particular phrase, he'd been talking about a general level of debate. We can look at this issue of further clarification and that has been something I've been discussing with a number of EU leaders. So we will be working expeditiously over the coming days to seek those further assurances that I believe MPs will need.
You might wonder what exactly has been going on with these negotiations. What are the misunderstandings in the relations between the EU and the Prime Minister? What has the President of the European Commission really been up to since that row?
We were not dancing. She thought that I did criticize her by saying yesterday night that the British position was nebulous. I did not refer to her, but to the overall state of the debate in Britain. And in the course of the morning, after having checked what I said yesterday night, she was kissing me.
We have treated Prime Minister May with a much greater empathy and respect than some British MPs, for sure.
We have to bring down the temperature. And these attacks coming from Westminster against Europe, against the European Commission, will not be responded in the same way by the European Commission and by the European Union. Although I would like to do it.
On and off the stage, the message from the EU is clear. They promise they'll do a trade deal as quickly as possible, so the backstop's never needed. But that cannot mean changing what's already been agreed.
We will not renegotiate it, and we do not want to reopen it. But Theresa is, of course, a tough negotiator, and there's a lot of understanding also for what UK wants. But I think we have to find a way to deal with each other. I think that the current deal is a good one for both sides.
And hearing what's been said in Brussels back in Westminster, that just won't wash with MPs who are demanding new legal guarantees.
To coin a phrase, it was a bit nebulous. She hasn't provided any new guarantees at all about the withdrawal agreement or specifically the backstop. So she's been to the European Council, she's expressed her concerns, and they've given her absolutely nothing.
We know the answer to the question whether there's going to be changes, and it's no. What we need is for this vote to be put next week, for us to vote on it, and then for Parliament to take control of the process.
The Prime Minister leaves here with a big problem. Remember, she kept her job in part this week because she promised she could get more compromise from her fellow EU leaders. But she's left tonight with assurances that there could be more conversations, and that simply might not be concrete enough to protect her in a hostile environment at home.
Expectations even yesterday were of more positive promises, but bumpy late-night talks diluted those. The cold truth is the lack of trust at Westminster is felt 200 miles away. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's in Downing Street for us this evening. But first, let's talk to our Europe correspondent, Damian Grammaticus, who's in Brussels. So, Damian, clarification but no renegotiation is what's on offer from EU leaders. What chance that Theresa May is going to get anything meaningful from Brussels?
Fiona, I think it's hard to see in the coming days because there are no formal negotiations going on. The leaders here have not committed to any sort of new meeting or summit coming up in January. And although they discussed the idea of looking into what offers or what help assurance they could give to the UK, they decided not to go ahead with that. And the reason was simple, was that in that hour that they spent talking with Theresa May yesterday, they had specific questions for her, which were what does she need and what does she think she can get through Parliament, and finally what sort of future relationship does she envisage with the EU, and her answers they felt were not sufficiently clear. So as the Irish Prime Minister was saying a short time ago, the EU, I think, feel that they have given assurances that they will negotiate a trade deal as quickly as possible. But as he said, that it's not a way they feel they can run international relations to agree something 2 weeks ago, have your negotiating partner back here asking for more concessions when it hasn't even been put to Parliament. So I think what we will see is the EU digging in, holding firm. They could wait for the UK to present some ideas, but otherwise we might have to wait until the clock is really ticking down in January to see if anyone will shift.
And John, in Downing Street, now the summit is over, what lies ahead for Theresa May back home?
Well, Fiona, at the end of a trial of a week for Theresa May, perhaps the best that can be said from her point of view is that she's still in the job, still battling on against mountainous odds. But tonight at Westminster, her Brexit plan still looks like a crushing defeat waiting to happen. There are many Conservatives who believe it's the best plan available, and she'll go on looking for ways to reassure the Commons. But as we head towards the big vote on that plan by January the 21st, the Brexiteers will carry on plotting. The pro-Europeans in the cabinet, they'll be canvassing the idea of votes in Parliament to find out what other plan might win through. And as for a second referendum, those supporting that, including Tony Blair, who's been speaking today, they're getting more confident by the day. Jeremy Corbyn, he's not at all keen on that plan. He's waiting for an opportunity to embarrass and damage the government by forcing a vote of confidence. Either way, Mrs May's statement to the House of Commons on Monday on today's summit looks like being another ordeal. As we head into the festive season for Mrs May, hope is running short, and in British politics, Fiona, charity is very thin on the ground.
John Pienaar in Downing Street and Damien Grammaticus in Brussels. Thank you both. A baby has died after he was attacked by two dogs at his family home in Cambridgeshire. Reuben McNulty, he was 5 weeks old, was taken to hospital after the attack in Yaxley last month, but has died of his injuries. John Donnison reports.
Reuben McNulty was only born last month, still just tiny and vulnerable. On the 18th of November, police were called to this flat on a quiet suburban estate in Yaxley near Peterborough. Officers say Reuben had been attacked by two Staffordshire Bull Terriers. He was treated for head injuries at Adam Brooks Hospital in Cambridge, but died yesterday.
Reuben McNulty was just 2 weeks old when he was attacked by the two dogs in the upstairs flat behind me. Neighbours have described the dogs as being docile. One neighbour said it was a freak accident.
Police say a 31-year-old man and a 28-year-old woman who were arrested on suspicion of child neglect have been released under investigation. Locals say that Reuben's parents, Daniel McNulty and Amy Litchfield, are the two people questioned and released by police. Officers say the death is not being treated as suspicious and the two dogs have been destroyed. John Donnison, BBC News, Yaxley.
A 16-year-old boy has been convicted of raping and murdering a 14-year-old girl in a Wolverhampton park. Victoria Sokolova had arranged to meet the boy in West Park last April. He can't be named because of his age, but has been told he'll face a mandatory life sentence. After a week in which allegations of racism in football have grabbed the headlines, England's Premier League has urged fans to report unacceptable behaviour. Chelsea have strongly condemned supporters who chanted anti-Semitic abuse during a match in Hungary last night, saying they have shamed the club. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson report contains images that some of you may find upsetting.
At their home ground, Chelsea present a welcome to the world. But this is a football club shamed by a section of its supporters. Chelsea made that clear today. Last night, some Chelsea fans used a match in Hungary to chant anti-Semitic words about a rival club in London, Tottenham. It's not an isolated example.
It is vile.
Educational films have been made, endorsed by Chelsea, showing previous incidents of fans making anti-Tottenham chants and then showing the historical reality of the Holocaust.
There is an element of that chant which is meant to be just anti-Tottenham, and that's the whole point of the film, to say you might think you're making anti-Tottenham chants, but actually when you sing Spurs are on their way to Auschwitz, this is what you're really chanting about.
Chelsea know the problem. The club promised today that any individuals found to have shamed the club by using anti-Semitic or racist words or actions will face the strongest possible action from the club. Instances of anti-Semitism are especially poignant and hard to comprehend at this club. After all, Roman Abramovich, who has bankrolled Chelsea for so many years, is himself Jewish. But last night's events come hard on the heels of Chelsea's game against Manchester City. And what happened there to Raheem Sterling? Chelsea have suspended 4 people from attending games after allegations by Raheem Sterling that he was racially abused. So, a grim old problem returning, or a sign of today's times?
You hope that it's something that doesn't escalate. Sometimes when times are harder, then they become more prevalent. But but racism holds no place in our game. It holds no place in society.
Today's attention is firmly on Chelsea. The issue this weekend and over the many festive matches to come is just how far football's problem extends. Joe Wilson, BBC News, West London.
The time is 6:15. Our top story this evening. No renegotiation in Brussels, but Theresa May says the EU will provide further clarification on her Brexit deal.
First, no 5 for a pound on the avocado.
Still to come, calls for labelling on food to show its carbon footprint.
Coming up on Sports Day on BBC News, former England spinner Ashley Giles replaces Andrew Strauss as Managing Director of England men's cricket ahead of next year's Ashes and the Home World Cup.
A silent walk is taking place in West London tonight to mark 18 months since the Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people in June last year. The first part of the Grenfell inquiry, which looked at failures before and during the fire itself, ended this week. But the inquiry's chairman has said the second phase, which will look at the wider causes of the fire, is unlikely to begin before the end of next year. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been talking to two survivors about how they feel about the inquiry so far.
The state palpably failed in its primary duty to protect its citizens.
I don't know how that building is still standing to this day. We should have all been dead.
If they were evacuated, the people's lives would be safe.
Sid Ali Atmani and Mahad Agal survived Grenfell with their families. Both provided evidence to the inquiry.
I was completely lost. The only solution I have to take is to get up.
After nearly 100 days of evidence, they wait on some answers.
They need to deliver. He needs to make sure to deliver the criminals, the one they are responsible for killing people.
I feel that a lot has been unearthed, and I hope to see that the culprits are under more scrutiny.
The inquiry has heard a litany of safety failures, harrowing 999 calls.
Don't give up. You can't give up. Don't give up. Come on, where's the fire brigade? Jesus! They shut me down. Come on, Joe.
Officials who didn't immediately send building plans and a list of residents to firefighters.
What were you actually doing during that period?
Standing there, responding to phone calls, speaking to people on the phone. Not very much.
Firemen who cried for those they couldn't save.
To the family of the people in flat 175, I was looking for another girl. I didn't know there was anyone in there.
And a fire chief who wouldn't accept they should have responded differently.
I wouldn't change anything we did on the night. I think, without exception, my firefighters, my officers and my control staff performed in a fantastic way.
You could have changed a lot of things in that night. It could happen.
She wouldn't change also the 72 people who died. She could have put her statement in a different way. Perhaps they could have had an improvised plan B for evacuation.
The inquiry chairman will deliver an interim report next year, but the second part, looking at wider issues, is set to be delayed.
Personally speaking, I think that there's more people now put at risk because phase 2 has been delayed and the conclusion to the inquiry is not being reached.
So it could be more than 3 years after the fire when this inquiry finally ends. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
A fourth person has died following the gun attack in the French city of Strasbourg on Tuesday. A fifth victim remains ill and 11 others have been wounded. Their killer, Sharif Shekat, was shot dead last night after opening fire on police officers who tracked him down. Donald Trump's former personal lawyer has claimed the president ordered him to pay off 2 women during the 2016 presidential election, even though Mr. Trump knew it was wrong. In an interview with ABC News, Michael Cohen, who's facing 3 years in prison, said Mr. Trump ordered the payments because the stories would damage his electoral prospects.
I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
Well, our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Washington. John, Michael Cohen is quite clearly calling President Trump a liar and seems determined to try and take him down with him.
Yeah, and you've got to put this in some kind of context, Fiona, because of course Michael Cohen has been convicted as a liar and a fraudster and is facing 3 years in prison. But giving that health warning, you also got to say that federal prosecutors have said he has given useful information and he claims to have corroborating evidence. And so what he's saying is that when Donald Trump said he didn't know about the payments, that wasn't true. He makes the point that everyone knows, nothing happens without Donald Trump knowing about it, and it was for political reasons. On the other side of this, Donald Trump's story about what he knew about the payments to a former porn star and a former Playboy model keep changing. He first of all denied any knowledge of it, then he said he did have knowledge of it, then he said it was a personal matter, nothing to do with campaign finance laws, then he's changed the story again saying, well, it may be to do with campaign finance laws, but it's no big deal, and finally we've had his most recent lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, saying nobody got killed, nobody got robbed, this was not a big crime. In other words, what Donald Trump did before the election might have been illegal, but it's no big deal.
John Stoffel in Washington, thank you. Now, would you change the way you eat if you knew the impact your food was having on the environment? Scientists are calling for mandatory labels that spell out food's carbon footprint, and that includes everything from meat to chocolate. They say it would help consumers to make more informed choices. Danny Savage has been to Bury Market to see what they make of the idea there.
Food, glorious food, and at this time of year we're stocking up big time.
Avocado person, 05 for a pound on the avocado.
But do we think about the environmental impact of its production and getting it here?
I think when you mention carbon footprint, I'm pretty vague on that, and I think a lot of people are, to be honest.
How often do you eat chicken?
Once a week.
One to two times a week.
We showed John and Helen the new calculator.
Tofu? Would you be prepared to eat more vegetarian food like tofu instead of meat?
I think we probably need persuading on that.
At the cheesemonger next door, local delicacies were in demand. Details about their carbon footprint, though, weren't.
Do you look at all this cheese and think, what's the carbon footprint of what I sell?
Absolutely not.
And do you think your customers think,
absolutely not.
Over at the fruit and veg stall, there's stuff from all over the world. The idea of local in-season produce only doesn't fly.
This time of year, I reckon that the fruit is all imported. So it's only the vegetables that are local and seasonal.
But Sue and Dan do think about the environmental impact and want to see labels.
If it was on there showing up that it was red carbon or green, then I think, yeah, it would make a difference. People would start looking.
And Dan and Sue are typical of many people we've talked to here today. They'd like more information about the carbon footprint of their food.
Labels would create the information about greenhouse gas emissions, about biodiversity loss, and put that on products. That means that consumers can change what they're purchasing.
A coffee a day over the course of a year uses as much CO2 as heating an average home for 24 days. Farmed fish a couple of times a week emits the same as driving a petrol car 373 miles. And if you eat beef once or twice a week, it's the annual equivalent of a return flight from London to Malaga. Although this butcher isn't too worried.
When the weather gets cold, the colder days draw in, I think the Sunday roast is always going to be very popular.
Will we all change our habits? Maybe, but not without more easily available information. Danny Savage, BBC News, Bury.
And if you'd like to see how your food choices affect your climate footprint, you can find the food calculator on the BBC News website. Members of the royal family have made public their Christmas cards, including a new wedding photo of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Harry and Meghan are seen watching fireworks at their evening wedding reception, while the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and their 3 children are pictured at their Norfolk home. A British yachtswoman whose boat capsized in a storm in the South Pacific 2,000 miles offshore has finally set foot on dry land in Chile. It's a week since she was rescued by a Chinese cargo ship. Susie Goodall had been competing in the solo Golden Globe Round the World race. Duncan Kennedy has more.
This is what relief looks like when you step ashore after surviving the drama of a mid-ocean crisis. No wonder the hug from Mum Brigitte and brother Tim meant Susie Goodall's ordeal was finally over.
Okay. All the best.
With just a medical checkup to go.
She is in a shock. Now she stayed in a hospital for a medical assistant.
It was the wild seas of the Southern Ocean with its 7-metre waves that triggered the emergency last week. In sailing terms, Susie's yacht pitch-poled, meaning it somersaulted forward end over end, smashing the mast and leaving her stranded for more than 2 days.
The boat is destroyed. Inside and out is destroyed.
It took a crane from a passing freight ship to hoist her out of danger. Susie, who's 29, was the youngest competitor in this Golden Globe race before she hit the storm. But she trained here at the UK Sailing Academy on the Isle of Wight. This afternoon we showed her friends the moment she made it back to shore in Chile.
Gives you goosebumps.
Yeah. Oh, it does. Really pleased for Susie and especially her family. She's been through a real ordeal and experience and adventure over the last few weeks, so pleased that she's made it back safely.
Susie Goodall is the 3rd sailor to be rescued in this year's race, but now she's safe and heading home for Christmas. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
All right, let's take a look at the weather. Stav Danaos is here. And Sam, it's been getting so chilly. Is that going to continue?
It is. In fact, Fiona, we're looking at some severe weather as we head on in towards the weekend. So you could say this is actually the quiet before the storm. Good evening to you. It has been another cold day. Quite breezy too, but we've had plenty of sunshine around as we head through tonight, this evening and tonight. It'll stay dry and cold through central and eastern areas with another widespread frost, but we'll start to see that change take place across the south and the west of the country. Temperatures coming up, but also some pretty heavy rain moving in. Tied in with this deep of low pressure is going to be the culprit to bring this severe weather. As it bumps into the cold air, it's likely to produce some significant snow across central and northern parts of the country, and we're also looking at a very high ice risk from freezing rain. So the Met Office have an amber warning issued for central and northern parts of the UK through Saturday into Sunday. We're most concerned about this ice area, as you can see here, from the North Midlands, northern England into central southern Scotland. This is from freezing rain falling on frozen surfaces, turning things into an ice rink. Treacherous conditions on the road, in fact, for the second half of Saturday into the overnight period. We start Saturday off on a dry, chilly note, central eastern areas, and then this rain starts to pile in as it bumps into that cold air, turns ready to freezing rain through central northern areas, but also snow, which will accumulate 2 to 5 centimetres lower levels, 10 to 20 over the hills. It's going to be turning increasingly windy as well, very wet and windy across the southwest, but we're looking at blizzard conditions further north as those winds sweep their way northwards through Saturday night into Sunday. In fact, we could see a swathe of gales for a time as well. Eventually, the whole thing does start to move northwards into Sunday, takes the snow and most of the ice with it, but there could still be a legacy of ice across northern areas. Watch out for that. Further south, a brighter, quieter day, lighter winds, some sunny spells, but also some showers, some of which will be quite heavy across the southwest. Note those temperatures creeping up from the south into double figures. But some very severe weather on its way with regards to the ice. Stay tuned to the weather forecast. Head online to look out for all the BBC weather warnings.
Sam, thank you very much. And that is all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me, and on BBC One we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.
Stories set to shape the news agenda. Headlines freshly written. Original perspectives on the day's unfolding narratives. See the bigger picture as it emerges. The Papers, weeknights at 10:40 on the BBC News Channel.
Here's the science bit.
Ready. Could a bendy phone be the future?
There really is no driver.
Oh,
feel better for that.
Click. Tomorrow at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Martine Cropsall. The headlines. Theresa May has insisted she's confident she can steer her Brexit deal through Parliament despite leading the EU summit in Brussels without the assurances she needs.
I reiterate that it is in the interests of the EU as well as the UK to get this over the line. A disorderly Brexit would be good for no one.
President Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen has said the president knew it was wrong to order the illegal payments of hush money to 2 women who alleged affairs with him. Mr. Trump denies asking Cohen to make the payments. Just days after 4 Chelsea fans were suspended for racist taunts, the club has said those who sang an anti-Semitic chant during a match last night have shamed the club. Susie Goodall, the British yachtswoman whose boat capsized in a solo round-the-world race, has arrived back on land in Chile. In a moment it'll be time for Sports Day, but first a look at what else is coming up this evening on BBC News. From 7 o'clock onwards, following the heightened tensions at the EU summit, we'll be visiting a number of EU capitals to get the mood music on Brexit amongst people there. At 8 o'clock we expect the rescued British yachtswoman Susie Goodall to hold a press conference, and we'll bring you that live from Chile. And later, after 10:30 and again at 11:30, we'll be taking a look at tomorrow's front pages in the papers with our guest Joe Twyman, director of the polling organisation Delta Poll, and political correspondent from the London Evening Standard Kate Proctor. All ahead on BBC News. Now it's time for Sports Day.
Hello and welcome to Sports Day. I'm Holly Hamilton. Coming up on the programme, we look at the issue of anti-Semitism at Chelsea as football fans are accused of using the political atmosphere as a cover for their own racism. After Raheem Sterling's comments on how young black footballers are portrayed by newspapers, we'll be discussing race, football and the media. Katrina Cox gets the better of fellow Rio Paralympic gold medalist Sarah Storey on the opening day of the Track World Cup in London. And Liverpool striker Mo Salah is the BBC's African Footballer of the Year for the 2nd year running.
It's a great feeling to win another award 2 years in a row, so happy to win it.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, just days after Chelsea banned 4 of their fans for alleged racist abuse, the club has now been forced to condemn the actions of supporters who were heard chanting anti-Semitic songs during last night's Europa League match in Hungary. While Chelsea have promised to take the strongest possible action, describing the incident as abhorrent. Well, our reporter Joe Curry joins me now to discuss this. Joe, Chelsea have obviously taken major steps to try to eradicate this type of behaviour. It just feels like the fans aren't listening, though.
Quite. This isn't the first time Chelsea have had to condemn their fans, but that's what they've done today. It's after a small pocket of supporters sang anti-Semitic chants during last night's Europa League game against the Hungarian side, Vidi. They say they've shamed their club. Now, the match finished 2-2, but the result completely overshadowed by what's being described as a vocal minority chanting offensive songs about Tottenham fans. Now, UEFA say it will wait the referee's report before deciding on whether any action, if any action, should be taken. But Chelsea, once again, in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons.
Certainly this week as well, Joe. And I mean, Chelsea actually launched a campaign earlier this year, and the whole idea was tackling this very issue of anti-Semitism. What has the club said in response to this week?
Yes, to be fair to the club, they're working very hard behind the scenes to try to stop their fans behaving in this way. In a statement today, they say any kind of racial or religious hatred is abhorrent to this club and the overwhelming majority of our fans. It has no place at Chelsea or in any of our communities. You mentioned there a video that they've released with the likes of the BBC radio presenter Jeremy Vine and the former England striker Eni Aluko talking about behaviour in football and racism and anti-Semitic chanting as well. In October, the club's chairman, Bruce Buck, said to a newspaper that fans who were found guilty of anti-Semitic abuse should actually visit the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz rather than banning them. And the club's owner, Roman Abramovich, who's Jewish himself, he's ploughed an awful lot of his own money into this issue. But for some reason, the Chelsea fans just don't seem to be listening to what their own club is saying to them.
And we're just seeing images from that video that was launched earlier this week that was trying to hit back at anti-Semitism. We can also hear from Frank Lampard. He was asked about this issue as well, about discrimination and racism. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think in a bigger picture, and there is one here, and this is not to exclude racism, racism is part of this, but I do get disappointed with the amount of hate that goes on in the modern society and game. Some of it's social media based. It's very plausible now to say, I don't like you because of how you look, because of your sex, because of your preferences, because of your family, because of your decisions that you made in your career. I think that's something we need to look at, and that's just about decency.
Interesting. Well, that was Frank Lampard. We can also hear now from former Chelsea winger Pat Nevin, who joins us now from Berwickshire. Pat, thanks for joining us tonight on Sports Day, unfortunately over such a dark topic. We just heard from Frank Lampard, Pat. Now, he says that he has condemned the actions, but he says that this is an issue that he thinks, anyway, that has improved since his era, since his father's era as well. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, no, it has improved massively since those eras, but that doesn't matter. We have to make sure that we stop any sort of antagonism towards anyone. As Frank correctly said, be it religion, race, sex, you name it. We don't accept that in football, and we certainly don't accept it in any clubs. In Chelsea Football Club, they get it pointed at them just now, but I'm sure they're furious, angry, exasperated, because they do everything they possibly can. Joe mentioned there in your report perfectly well, suggestions sending some of these fans to Auschwitz to give them an idea of the offence they're causing, but it's hard to know what you do. I mean, I've been a chief executive at a club myself, and you try absolutely everything. You work with the community, just as Chelsea are doing, with their foundation. You put posters up, you put stuff on the website, you put stuff in the programmes, you get the players talking about it, you give opportunities saying to fans, look, if you hear something beside you, you make a comment, you come to us, we'll do something about it. You put CCTV in. You try everything. Education is at the base of it, so you try that as well. And in the midst of doing all this, and you mentioned yourself there, the campaign that anti-Semitism was set up earlier by Chelsea earlier this year, and doing everything you possibly can, and then these few idiots, and it doesn't matter if it's few or lots, one's bad enough, they go and besmirch the name of not only a football club, but football and society as well. It is infuriating, exasperating, embarrassing, and we just need to keep on, flagging up. And may I say, well done to the BBC and all areas of the media for flagging up. It must be done so you don't duck it, and happily Chelsea aren't ducking it either.
Hello, Pat. Joe Curry here. The club have strongly condemned these fans once again, but what more can they actually do to prevent this happening?
Well, that's a great question, and that's the point. I mentioned the fact that I'd been a chief executive at a club before, and when things pop up like that, you will rack your brains to do everything you possibly can. Everything that's, legal, that's, short of denying people their civil rights. But if it means CCTV cameras, it means educating everybody around in the stands. Now, it's a bit easier for Chelsea to do that within the environs of Stamford Bridge, because they can close in on people, they can, if they're flagged up by the media or anything, you can do that. It's great. It's a wee bit harder to do it when fans travel. And I was talking to some fans this morning who'd actually just come home from the game, and they hadn't heard it, but they'd gone with the Chelsea group, and they get their tickets at a certain place. And they had said that it was people without tickets. So it's so hard for the club to, get inside these people's head. Don't know, they're travelling on their own anyway. They're getting their tickets off touts, whatever. It's incredibly hard to do, but you have to keep on trying. And happily, that's what football continues to do, and that's what Chelsea continue to do. But as I say, massive embarrassment, and it leaves the club feeling very angry.
Pat Nevin, thank you so much for joining us on Sports Day, and Joe Curry, thank you as well. Now, the behaviour of fans, of course, will be another blow to the Blues over the past week, with fans also accused of racism just a few days ago. 4 fans suspended following the alleged racial abuse of Raheem Sterling, who has since accused newspapers of helping to fuel racism by the way they portrayed young black footballers. Well, my colleague Hugh Wizencroft has been joined by journalists Jordan Jarrett-Bryan, Natasha Henry and Leon Mann to discuss the issues around race, football and the media.
Well, Raheem Sterling's words have got me and many others in the sports journalism industry thinking about the current state of play, I guess. And I've called on some of my fellow black sports journalists to examine the state of the industry.
I don't think it's too much hyperbole to suggest that what Raheem Sterling has done is a game changer for me, because what he's done is really made editors, just the power, look at themselves. I think Raheem Sterling's done something very, very brave, but we can't leave him on his own.
This is a moment for us. It's just what happens from here, because this is really about better journalism. This is about making sure there are more thorough processes. If discussions were made about Raheem Sterling's gun on his leg, you know, and if there were proper debates before that was published, maybe it wouldn't have been published.
I had an experience. I was working for a mainstream newspaper when Griezmann blacked up for the party, and the editors there, because they had someone there that was of colour, because it was someone who had gone through personal experience, who would have a personal opinion on the blackface, they asked me, was it racist? How do you think we should word this headline? Should we accuse him of being a racist? If you don't have who has that personal experience, how can you create the correct story, the correct headline, and tell it with the correct perspective?
You know, a lot of sports journalists say it's not them that write these stories. They come from the front page, the news journalists, and that's something that maybe members of the public don't understand.
There's still no excuse for some of the language, some of the writing, reporting of some of these players. I think that it's easy to say, oh, it's not us, it's the front pages of the newspapers. They're the ones that are writing negatively about Raheem Sterling. I've seen some back page headlines about Raheem Sterling as well, so they have to be accountable too. The words you write about people are very, very powerful, and I think now we're going to watch and read with extreme scrutiny about how, going forward, football writers write about black players in particular.
I think even if it is different parts of the newspaper, if you're not calling it out, you're enabling it.
I think the narrative around footballers is that they work hard. I think the narrative around black footballers is they're naturally gifted. One suggests you work to where you get to. The other suggests you're just given it because you were born with it. And why aren't you doing more with it? And that's a narrative that John Barnes had to live through. It's a narrative that Ian Wright had to live through. So let's hope things get better.
There's a lot of talk. A lot of talk. You know, but no one's backing their chat. Everyone says, oh, we understand our newsroom isn't diverse. We understand we don't have enough women, enough non-white people, or enough people of a certain age, a certain socio-demographic, and you see them 3 years later and they repeat the same thing to you and nothing has changed.
This is an uncomfortable moment for the media, for our industry, but this discomfort that white journalists are feeling right now about this conversation is the discomfort that many of us black sports journalists have felt just going into white environments to do our jobs every single day. They need to consider that. They need to consider, you know, the sensitivities around the situations that we've been put in over the years and the way that they have been responded to. There is a lack of diversity in our industry. It needs to be addressed, and we need to see some action.
And what I will finally say as well, if you love football and if you love sports and you want sport and football to be better, make the industry more diverse. Because the more diverse football is, the more diverse football media is, the better it will be.
Now, we've got a lot to get through, but let's have a quick look at some of the day's other stories now. And former England spinner Ashley Giles is England's new managing director of men's cricket. He will be responsible for the strategy, coaching and management. He replaces Andrew Strauss, who stepped down in October. Justin Rose is 8 under par after the second round of the Indonesian Masters, and that sees him currently tied for 5th. He needs to finish in the top 12 to end the year as world #1. Mark Allen is through to the semi-finals of the Scottish Open. He whitewashed Alfie Burden 5-0 in Glasgow. Shaun Murphy is also through to the last 4. Now, the Track Cycling World Cup has been getting underway in London, with the world's best riders competing on the boards at the iconic Lee Valley Velo Park this weekend, with Tokyo 2020 qualifying points on the line. Paracycling events are making their debut at this event, with British paracyclists already claiming 2 golds this afternoon, with 2 more up for grabs this evening. Kit Gray is there for us.
The world's best cyclists have descended on the Lee Valley Velo Park, and for the first time ever, paracycling events have been included in the World Cup schedule. And the British paracyclists have certainly not disappointed in front of their home crowd, with Kadina Cox winning gold in the 500 metres time trial, beating her teammate Dame Sarah Story.
It was a bit of a surprise. I've only been back like 8 weeks, so to manage to put out a half-decent time, I was quite happy with it. It's quicker than I've been going in training, so I guess performing on a world stage is what I like doing.
And beating a certain Dame over here, that's got to be something to be proud of as well.
I do like to beat Sarah every now and again, but I mean, it's not really her main event, so I guess I'll take this one.
Well, the success continued for the paracyclist, with Jody Cundy winning gold in the 1 kilometre time trial, and I'm very pleased to say he joins us now. Congratulations on the gold, and obviously great to be here in London. And you've got another event coming up this evening.
Yes, we qualified fastest in the team sprint this morning, so it's the fastest qualifying we've done since the Paralympic Games. So yeah, we're in good spirits and in a good place. So we've got a couple of seconds over the American lads. So fingers crossed we can pull it together and maybe find a few more tenths of a second.
And obviously being here at the World Cup alongside your able-bodied counterparts, I mean, how important is that, and what can we look forward to from them this evening?
Well, it's fabulous being part of this World Cup. I mean, it's a huge races that they have throughout the year and stuff, and we've never had anything like it in paracycling. So to race alongside these guys and demonstrate basically how good paracycling is, we've got a lot of world champions, there's a lot of rainbow bands going around, and there's been a lot of good performances this morning. So to be able to do that, to showcase our events in front of all these guys, fingers crossed it's the start of something good, and maybe we'll get more integrated events as we go along. Whether it continues in the same way or whether they expand it and turn it into something special, it's always good to be part of it when it's first doing something. So I think we've done a good display this morning, and fingers crossed we'll have a good crowd in here tonight to show what the team sprint's like.
And what can we look forward to? What names should we look out for?
Oh, well, tonight you've got the team pursuits, so men's and women's. You've got the GB squad. Oh, yesterday in qualifying there was 7 seconds faster than anybody. I mean, you've got the names of Laura Kenny in there and stuff. I mean, she's like a household name when it comes to cycling, plus all of her teammates. And then you've got the team from Derby, Who What Bike. They're in the men's team pursuit and they're fastest in there. And they're pretty much doing everything outside of the British cycling, all their own aero testing, all their own training, all their own equipment and stuff. And they've kind of redefined what can be done from an outside team, so they're pretty fabulous as well. So they're good to watch, and then our team sprinters, the girls are doing all right, and the men have got the Dutch. They're hot on the heels of the Dutch, so yeah, it should be a good evening to watch some race, and hopefully get to see some of it before I warm up and do our team sprint.
Well, thank you for that summary. So much to look forward to, including your own performance.
Yes,
Best of luck in that, and the action will continue here at 7 o'clock, and you can follow all of that on the BBC Sport website.
Kate Gray reporting there. Now, also coming up in the programme tonight, we're with Liverpool striker Mo Salah, as he's crowned the BBC's African Footballer of the Year for the 2nd year running. And its football team once won the European Cup, and now Red Star Belgrade has a rugby league side. We'll tell you all about the newest team in this year's Challenge Cup. Well, this weekend sees England's hockey players take on Belgium in their semi-final of the Men's World Cup in India. That's after beating reigning Olympic champions Argentina in the quarters, and now they're eyeing their first final since 1986. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the team's captains, Phil Roper, who told me despite having to take the crossover route to the semis, they are feeling confident.
We got off to a slow start, which obviously isn't what you really want, but we're really trying to build some momentum in the tournament, which we spoke about beforehand. And the last 3 games, having beaten 3 incredibly tough teams in New Zealand, Ireland, and Argentina, the Olympic reigning champions, we're full of confidence and ready to go tomorrow.
And Australia, Netherlands, and of course yourselves, they were in the last 4 in the previous World Cup. Belgium, though, this will be their first semi-final. It is a very experienced side. Who would you expect to really dominate the ball, I suppose? But does that give you more of an advantage, though, with your experience?
I guess maybe a little bit, but it's probably just a little bit of heritage, to be honest with you. As you said, Belgium have got such an experienced team at this tournament, and they've started to become a real powerhouse of world hockey. But at the same time, as you said, we've been here before. We're gaining confidence. We're playing some pretty exciting hockey, so we're going to try and take that into tomorrow and try and turn them over.
Any news on Barry Middleton? He's, of course, your most experienced player. What impact would his absence have on the side?
I'm sure it would have an impact, but hopefully that won't be the case. As you said, he's an incredibly experienced player, with having played over 400 times for England and Great Britain. He's such a great role model for all of us, so hopefully his fitness tests go well and he'll be with us tomorrow. But either way, we're going to go out there and put everything out there.
Phil Roper speaking to me earlier. Now to rugby, with the Champions Cup continuing this weekend. By Sunday evening we should have a clear idea of who is in and who is out. Well, tonight Exeter Chiefs go into their clash with Gloucester, needing a bonus point win to avoid putting themselves out of the reckoning, while Ulster take on Scarlets, hoping to make it a double victory following their win in Wales last week. Our Rugby Union correspondent Chris Jones has more.
It was a brilliant win they had down in West Wales, the Ulstermen. A couple of players really showing form. Will Addison, who left Sale to join Ulster, has been outstanding. And also having Marcel Coetzee, the Springbok in the back row, back fit. That's given